President John F. Kennedy once said, "Never before has man had such a great capacity to control his own environment, to end hunger, poverty, and disease, to banish illiteracy and human misery. We have the power to make the best generation of mankind in the history of the world." We're pleased today to have Marian Wright Edelman here with us as our commencement speaker. Ms. Edelman has made an incredible difference in our nation. She was the first Black woman admitted to the Mississippi bar and has worked tirelessly to advocate for all disadvantaged people. She has devoted her life to the service of others. She's the founder and the president of the Children's Defense Fund, which has become the nation's strongest voice for children and families. She's the embodiment of the words spoken by President Kennedy over 50 years ago. She stands before you today as a role model for all. For her humanitarian efforts, Portland State University is honored to award Marian Wright Edelman the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters and have her deliver the 2010 Commencement Address.
I'm so honored to join the Portland State University campus family, and I am honored to be here today with your president and your administration and faculty, with your families, and most importantly, not only with the biggest Portland State graduating class, but what I am sure is the best graduating class in the history of Portland State University. I begin almost every speech quoting Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great German Protestant theologian who died opposing Hitler's Holocaust, because I share his belief that the test of the morality of a society is how it treats its children. The United States flunks Bonhoeffer's test every hour of every day. As a child of all race and income groups, these figures I'm going to give you, drops out of school every 11 seconds, is born into poverty in our rich nation every 32 seconds, is abused or neglected every 41 seconds, is born without health insurance every 42 seconds, is born at low birth weight every minute, and is killed by guns every 3 hours. We have lost 110,000 children to gunfire in America since 1979. That's more than all of the U.S. battle casualties since World War II. Yet we have no anti-war movement to protect our children. We are about to release our latest data on child and gun violence, and we have lost 3 times more children in the most recent year to gun violence than we have lost in the years and all the battle casualties in the Afghanistan war. Greatest threat to the United States national security comes from no enemy without. It comes from our failure to invest in all of our children now. We will not be prepared. We will not be prepared to compete in the future if we do not change course. It is a great danger that a majority of children in all racial and income groups cannot read or compute at grade level in 4th, 8th, or 12th grade if they have not already dropped out of school. And it is unacceptable that a majority of all 80%, over 80%, of Black and Hispanic children cannot read or do math at these grade levels, and they will constitute a majority of our population before the year 2050. We may not like these children who we think of as other people's children, but we're going to need them to be productive workers, and we need to invest in them now. Leo Iacocca, when he was chairman of and CEO of Chrysler, said that in a completely rational society, the best of us would be teachers, and the rest of us would settle for something less. Education needs to attract, he continued, and retain the best of us. But that won't happen as long as teaching ranks near the bottom of all our professions in pay and prestige. And while you are And we've got to change that, and while you or any of you who are still in the job market looking for a job, why don't you think about teaching? It's the most important job you can take. And become early childhood people. Our country's got to do a better job in catching up with Europe and other industrialized nations and providing better safety nets to invest early and effectively in our children before they get sick, drop out of school, get into trouble, or suffer a family breakdown. We are leaving millions of children behind and pushing hundreds of thousands of children each year into what the Children's Defense Fund calls the cradle-to-prison pipeline. A black boy born in 2001 has a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison in his lifetime, a Latino boy a 1 in 6 chance. And despite the election of our first African-American president and Oprah Winfrey's supremacy in the airwaves, the most dangerous place still for a child to try to grow up in America is at that intersection of race and poverty. Poverty and racial disparities are the biggest factors behind this prison pipeline, and it is shameful that in the richest nation on earth, every 5th child is poor, every 3rd black and Latino child is poor, and we are the only industrialized nation that lets our children be the poorest age group in our nation. We need to change that. I am deeply concerned that incarceration is becoming the new American apartheid, and I am not proud that we are the world's leading jailer. Unless we change course, much of the social and civil rights progress of the last 50 years will be undermined. So I want to just take a few moments to say here are 3 or 4 or 5 reasons why we should invest in children. Now, whether it's an economic downturn or a good time, children must come first rather than last in our attention in our country. First, they're the seed corn of the future. And we cannot, because of down in economic weather, decide that we're not going to invest in that seed corn and waste them because they are our future workers and parents and soldiers and leaders. And if that's at risk, if future's at risk, if the foundation of your house is at risk, you don't say you can't afford to fix it now before it crumbles around you. This will require a major paradigm shift in our nation, and it will require a transforming intergenerational movement that is focused on seeing that we have a level playing field in this great country for every child, and I hope every one of you will be a part of that as parents, as professionals, as citizens of this great democracy. You cannot have a strong democracy without an educated citizenry, and we cannot depend on experts to guide us for the future. We need to remember that Noah's Ark was built by amateurs, the Titanic was built by experts. We need to be sure that citizens are engaged in protecting Imagine what our world and nation would look like if we had invested 10 or 20% of the trillions of dollars spent on weapons of death since the end of the Cold War, on eradicating poverty, and on giving great education to every one of our children. I love to quote our former senator here from Oregon, Mark Hatfield, who said eloquently and bluntly, and asked us, how can we stand by as children starve by the millions because we lack the will to eliminate hunger? Yet we have found the will to develop missiles capable of flying over the polar cap and landing within a few hundred feet of their target. He says this is not innovation, it is a profound distortion of humanity's purpose on Earth. And I agree with that. I think that our goal in being born on Earth is to leave it better and safer for the next generations, and we need to change course. And your generation and your class can help us do that. The third reason we've got to invest in children is because they can't wait. And they must come first, not last, in our budget and investment considerations. Chilean Nobel laureate for literature Gabriela Mistral wrote many years ago that many things we need can wait. The child cannot. Now is the time his bones are being formed, his blood is being made, his mind is being developed. To him we cannot say tomorrow. His name is today. And I profoundly believe that it is morally obscene to let homeless, dying, illiterate children or ask them to wait until our economy rebounds. How can we expect them to believe in and support a democratic system that does not believe in and protect them? We need to do it because preventive investment in children is cost-effective, it saves lives, but it also saves money. Every year, the United States lets over 14.5 million children remain poor, cost our nation over $500 billion in foregone productivity, poor health, and increased crime. We've had an increase of poor children, about 2.5 million over the last several years, and that's before the new recession figures come out. And half of those children who have fallen into poverty are living in extreme poverty. We need to stop saying we cannot afford to end poverty for children and recognize that we cannot afford not to end it. We should, in this rich nation, have that as our goal, and we will all benefit. Ignorance is a lot more expensive than education. A Columbia University's Teachers College study said that cutting the U.S. dropout rate in half would yield $45 billion a year in federal tax revenues or cost savings. Every dollar we spend vaccinating children against measles, mumps, and rubella saves $16 in medical costs to treat them. We cannot afford to have a quarter of our 2-year-olds not immunized against preventable diseases. The National Academy of Sciences says that preterm births cost U.S. society $26 billion a year, and that the medical costs for low birth weight babies are 10 times that of normal births. The United States cannot afford to rank 21st in low birth weight births among industrialized nations. New York State, like most states, faces enormous budget deficits, yet they are spending $210,000 a year to imprison youths, a majority for nonviolent offense, most of them from New York City, black children who are 32 times more likely than white children to be sent to these youth prisons in upstate New York. That's about 4 times what it costs to send a kid to Harvard or to Yale. And I'm sure a lot more than you paid for your education here over 4 years at Portland State. The recidivism rate is 75%, and it's a major public health danger, and these expensive youth prisons are simply a training ground for the adult criminal system. On average, including Oregon, our states are spending 3 times more per prisoner than per public school pupil. I can't think of a dumber investment policy. We need to change it. We need to get our priorities straight. Fourth, we should invest in children because we can afford it. It's nonsense to talk about being the richest nation on earth, the largest GDP, the largest number of millionaires and billionaires despite our economic downturn of the moment. We do not have a money problem in America. We have a profound values problem and priorities problem, and we must change course. We spend more in in 1 second, on military defense than on a Head Start early childhood development teacher in a year. That's a wrong-headed priority. The highest paid American CEO took home over $100 million in 2008. That's an amount equal to the salaries of 2,028 elementary school teachers, or 3,827 Head Start teachers, or 5,275 child care workers, all of whom need better salaries to work with our children. The average CEO of a Fortune 500 company earns 319 times as much as the average worker, something I believe is out of balance. Now, I don't begrudge anybody their first, fifth, or 10th million or billion, if we do not have homeless, hungry, uneducated children in our midst. But something is awry in our nation when 408 of our richest people, who are billionaires, have a net worth that is equivalent to $1.3 trillion, which is more than the combined GDP of 134 countries with billions of people. That's not the right balance. That's not justice. That's not a level playing field. Everybody should pull their fair share, and this is out of balance. We need to change course, and you can help do that by building this movement to say we're going to see that every one of our children gets their needs. I took Robert Kennedy and others, Senator Clark, down to Mississippi in 1967 in the middle of the poverty program that was being attacked, to the Mississippi Delta to see hungry people without any income, and they saw the empty refrigerator. They didn't have refrigerators. We had ice boxes back then, if you were wealthy enough to have an ice box. But they walked through the houses of poor sharecroppers in the Mississippi Delta, and they saw people who had no income and who could not afford food stamps, which the Mississippi state government had begun to increase and take away the free food commodities. And when Robert Kennedy went back and saw, after he saw these hungry babies with bloated bellies and said he'd never seen anything like it in America and couldn't believe that we had this in America, he went back up to Orville Freeman, then our Secretary of Agriculture, and told him to get the food down there to make sure that we cut out the cost for food stamps, because there were people who could not afford the $2 for the food stamps, and Orville Freeman did not believe that there were people in the United States of America with no income. And so he was asked to send his own officials back down to retrace the senator's steps and to see those income-less people for himself. And when they came back and reported on what they had found, they did begin to change those poor people's rules, the food stamps rules, and that eventually resulted in a major poor people's campaign that Dr. King had announced before he died. I read in the New York Times a front-page story by Jason DeParle within the last 60 days, that 40 million people are on food stamps, and a whole lot of us who think these things can never happen to us when we lose our jobs and lose our homes, find ourselves staying and standing in the food stamp lines, and the majority of those folk who get it are children, and they're in working families. But the thing that astonished me, and we've not had any debate about, was that 1 in 50 Americans in this downturn have no cash income, while we have millionaires and billionaires who are not doing their fair share. We need to change course and close that gap. We are now at a point where we have the highest gap between rich and poor that we've had since we were recording this data. We need to change course. And finally, we need to invest in our children, because we pretend to believe in a Judeo-Christian tradition, and I'm the daughter of a Baptist minister, and I was taught that every child is sacred, and that God did not make two classes of children. And Albert Camus, the great laureate, Nobel laureate in France, spoke at a Dominican monastery in 1948, and he, I think, eloquently said what our purpose is on life. And he says, perhaps we cannot prevent this world from being a world in which children are tortured, but we can reduce the number of tortured children. He described our responsibility as human beings, if not to reduce evil, at least not to add to it, and to refuse to consent to conditions which torture innocence. I continue, he said, to struggle against this universe in which children suffer and die, and so must every one of us. Only then, when each of us stands up for children, will the demands of all great faiths and our global and national need for justice and peace become reality. Only then will our world become safe and fit for all, especially for our children and grandchildren. And why else are we here on earth? So I want to end with a very short prayer, because I believe that we have pushed so many of our children onto the tumultuous sea of life in very small and leaky boats. I hope God will forgive us, and I hope they will forgive us, and I hope we will all today recommit to giving all of our children the anchors of faith and love, the rudder of hope, the sails of health and education, and the paddles of family and community, to keep them safe and strong when life's sea inevitably gets rough. What good does it do for all of us to live in the richest nation on earth, with the richest GDP, with the greatest number of billionaires, with the leading military budget, the leading in health military technology, and we lose our souls, we lose our future? We're not going to have that happen. Godspeed to you as you go out into the world.